When the cold fluid rushed down my legs at 2 in the morning, I honestly believed my husband would protect me. Instead, Vance glanced at his glowing phone, pulled the thick blanket over his shoulders, and told me to call a city ambulance because he had a morning presentation. I stood there shivering in the darkness, realizing that 12 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing to him. My name is Joanna, and at 44 years old, I worked as a quiet archivist at the community library in Oak Creek. I spent my entire life organizing messy things, arranging historical records, and keeping schedules perfectly aligned. I always assumed that if you paid enough attention to the small details, you could prevent your life from falling apart completely. That structured mindset was the only thing that kept me moving forward through 7 agonizing years of fertility treatments. There were countless clinical injections, hormonal shifts, and 2 devastating miscarriages that still made my chest tighten with grief whenever I thought about them. When this final round of medical intervention succeeded, the doctors warned me that my advanced age made it a dangerous pregnancy. The very afternoon before my labor started, Vance held my round stomach while smiling for a photograph to share online. He posted the picture with a caption about how he could not wait to become a father, and the praise from his friends arrived immediately. Yet the moment he put his phone down, he grumbled about the price of the nursery rocking chair I selected. I constantly found logical reasons to excuse his cold behavior because I desperately wanted our family to succeed. I told myself he was merely stressed about his career or terrified of facing the immense responsibilities of fatherhood at 46. I was incredibly talented at constructing beautiful lies to cover up the painful reality of his growing indifference toward our future. After Vance turned away from me in the dark bedroom, I stumbled into the hallway and dialed emergency services myself. When the emergency vehicle arrived, my elderly neighbor Maeve was already hobbling across the pavement toward my front door. Despite her severe joint pain, she grabbed my packed bags and climbed into the vehicle next to me, refusing to let me face the hospital alone. The delivery quickly turned into a terrifying medical emergency when the heart rate of my baby began to plummet. The medical staff rushed my stretcher down the brightly lit corridor, and the heavy doors slammed shut behind me, shutting Maeve out. My son Toby was delivered through an emergency operation at dawn, his loud cries filling the sterile room while I wept with relief. Vance never answered any of the urgent calls from the hospital staff throughout my entire agonizing labor. It was past noon when his first communication arrived, consisting of a brief text message asking if the delivery went well. There was no phone call, no question about our health, and no indication that he cared about the major surgery I just survived. A seasoned night shift nurse named Sharon noticed my shaking hands as I stared blankly at the cold message on my screen. She gently adjusted the blanket around baby Toby and softly remarked that people always find excuses to avoid showing up when things get difficult. She reminded me that a mother never forgets the individuals who actually stand by her side during her darkest hours. 1 week later, I returned to our house alone with Toby because Vance claimed he was far too busy to visit us. When he knew arrived to see his child for social media updates, I stood firmly in the doorway. I looked him directly in the eyes and asked exactly which son he was referring to since he abandoned us during the birth. Vance scoffed and claimed I was acting completely ridiculous, asserting that his demanding career required his full attention. He looked over my shoulder toward Maeve, who was quietly sitting near the window, helping me fold the baby clothes. When Vance demanded to know why an outsider was in our home, Maeve calmly reminded him that she was the one who accompanied me in the ambulance. He reluctantly washed his hands and held Toby for a few brief moments, positioning his phone to capture perfect selfies. The exact second the baby began to cry, Vance handed him back to me and claimed he had an important corporate dinner to attend. He walked out the front door, leaving me to nurse our child while my physical incisions throbbed with intense pain. A few days later, our shared household debit card was repeatedly declined when I attempted to purchase essential infant formula. I logged into our financial accounts late that night and discovered that our savings were completely drained. There were massive charges for luxury hotels, expensive jewelry stores, and romantic dinners in cities where Vance claimed he was conducting business trips. The final betrayal appeared on an old family tablet that was still synchronized to the electronic account of my husband. A notification popped up from a woman named Alyssa, containing explicit text messages about their ongoing romantic affair. The most painful message stated that I would be far too exhausted with a newborn child to ever notice what they were doing. The next morning, I sat in the quiet office of a prominent family attorney named Eleanor, holding a massive binder of financial evidence. Eleanor reviewed the records and explained that the legal system required objective documentation rather than emotional outbursts. She warned me that Vance would try to manipulate the situation, but our primary focus must remain entirely on protecting the well-being of Toby. When Vance received the formal legal separation papers, he rushed home with bags of groceries and a sudden desire to reconcile. He suggested that we delay the legal proceedings for 3 months until his annual corporate bonus arrived to benefit everyone. I pulled out the printed copies of his secret messages with Alyssa, and his face drained of color as he realized his deception failed. As I analyzed the financial statements further, I noticed that the luxury hotel expenses matched the exact dates of his corporate reimbursement records. Vance was charging his personal romantic getaways directly to his employer by labeling them as business expenses. Before I could even process this fraud, Vance illegally transferred the remaining emergency funds out of our shared bank account, forcing me to sell my beloved heirloom jewelry. My legal counsel called 2 days later to inform me that the company of my husband had launched a massive internal audit. The financial documents submitted during our legal discovery process had automatically triggered red flags within their corporate accounting department. Vance had assumed his employers were just as blind as he thought I was, but his extensive corporate greed finally caught up with him. Before the official court date, Vance arrived at my apartment unannounced and loudly demanded to take Toby away without a proper infant car seat. When I refused to comply with his unsafe demands, he grew furious and summoned the local police department to intervene. The responding officers reviewed my meticulously organized legal folders and ordered Vance to leave immediately, recognizing his clear lack of parental involvement. The temporary custody hearing took place in a silent courtroom, where Vance sat next to his mother and a visibly uncomfortable Alyssa. Eleanor presented the undeniable timeline of his total abandonment, including the precise log of the emergency medical call and his complete absence during labor. Maeve testified clearly about hearing Vance snore while the paramedics carried me down the front steps in the dark. During a brief court recess, Vance received a phone call confirming that his employer had officially terminated him for financial misconduct. His corporate titles were stripped away, his career was completely ruined, and Alyssa walked out of the courthouse alone without looking back. The judge granted me full physical custody of Toby and ordered Vance to complete intensive parenting courses before receiving any visitation rights. Over the next 8 months, I learned to rebuild our lives through small moments of grace and steady daily routines. I traded my large vehicle for a cheap used sedan to cover our mounting legal expenses, and I returned to my archival work. My mother Martha arrived with her walking cane to help me fold laundry, proving that family is defined by genuine actions. On the first birthday of Toby, we celebrated in the library community room surrounded by the loyal friends who carried us through the year. Vance arrived exactly on time, bearing a simple wooden toy and looking visibly humbled by his massive corporate downfall. He pulled me aside into the quiet hallway to express his deepest regrets for being a completely selfish partner during our marriage. I looked at him and realized that the broken woman who once begged for his affection no longer existed inside of me. True love is never measured by hollow online posts or grand promises, but by the beautiful presence of those who show up. If you have someone who quietly stands by you during your hardest season, cherish them completely while you still can.